Hi, I would just like to apologise in advance for how long it has taken me to do this video. I said a couple of months ago I was going to do a video about my recovery from ORIF surgery on my ankle, but life has got in the way. I won't bore you with the details, but I have horses. I obviously am self-employed as a dog groomer. I also have a quite a rare sleep disorder, and so if I'm not at work or with the horses, I am usually asleep. So I have tried to film this a few times and fallen asleep, and it's not got finished. But I am sitting down today. I'm going to keep it brief. I do have a tendency to waffle on once I get going, so I am going to try and keep this as brief as possible and just try and explain how I recovered so quickly from my ankle surgery. So I did my injury on the 9th of November 2022, out riding my horse on my own, and I ended up coming off. Quite a strange fall. As I came off to the left, and my right leg ended up on top of her, kind of above her saddle. And just as my right leg was on top of her saddle, unfortunately, she kind of bucked and leapt up into the air, and so she snapped my leg outwards. So my leg was already broken before I hit the floor. I heard it break. Because people just assumed that I'd fallen and landed on my ankle and it had snapped, but actually it snapped before I'd even hit the floor. I was blue lighted over to Aintree trauma unit. I knew my ankle was broken because I had kind of automatically grabbed my own, when I was lying on the floor, I'd look down and I had long leather boots on, but even in the long leather boots, I could tell that my leg wasn't straight, and I instinctively grabbed my leg and pulled it, and I felt what felt like eggshells in my boot, and that was when I realised that I'd done something pretty major. So I was blue lighted over to Aintree, to the trauma unit. I had to have my leg pulled into place a couple of times. Unfortunately, they did it once and it went back out again. I had no pulse to my foot, so they wanted to get the pulse back to my foot, because you are at risk of losing your limb if you don't have a blood supply to your foot for a fair amount of time. I am allergic to morphine, pethidine, dihydrocodeine, any top bracket of painkiller, because my blood pressure is naturally very low. And so if I have any of those types of drugs, because they tend to lower people's blood pressure anyway, it puts mine on the floor and then I end up having seizures. So I can't have anything like that. So I had paracetamol. They gave me a tiny bit of ketamine when they pulled my leg in, but they were a little bit wary of giving me too much ket because of how I can react to drugs. But yeah, to be honest with you, and I'm not trying to sound big-headed or anything, but I don't really feel pain as kind of like normal people. I remember my leg throbbing, but it was not overwhelming. I actually turned down paracetamol in the ambulance because I just didn't really think it warranted it. But I do appreciate some people have like a huge amount of pain with their injury. The damage I had done, I'd done a tib fib. So I'd broken my fib. It was a Weber C, which means it's above the syndesmotic joint, so kind of more lower leg. I had smashed through my tibia through the joint at the ankle, which was the one they were really worried about, because I had shattered through the joint in several places and there was fragments of bone in the joint, kind of mixed up with the cartilage. The cartilage was a mess. I'd done an avulsion fracture of my talus. I had ruptured my deltoid ligament, some other ligament that kind of keeps so I dislocated it as well because those other ligaments were all snapped. I'd done a pretty good job. There was a lot of fragments of bone. all over the place. And they did tell me it was quite an unusual injury because of the way I'd done it, because it had been kind of broken outwards. Injuries tend to follow a pattern, and mine didn't follow the normal pattern because of the way I'd broken it. So that was the injury I had. It took 4.5 hours of surgery to fix. I didn't have the surgery straight away because my leg was so swollen. I had the surgery actually 7 days. I broke it on a Wednesday. I had my surgery the following Thursday, so it was just over a week. It was booked for earlier on, and there was an emergency came in, so it was cancelled. They couldn't do it straight away because my leg had swelled that much that they were worried if they opened it up, they wouldn't have been able to stitch the skin back together. So that's why often they have to wait before they can do the surgery. My surgeon was absolutely amazing. He came in and explained that I had done a really unusual and potentially life-changing injury because of the damage I'd done to the joint. He said he was going to go in and do his absolute best to fix it. He knew I was a horse rider and that I wanted to get back to, obviously, riding. But he did warn me that I might be left with complications, I might walk with a limp. There's a high chance of arthritis setting in quite early. So yeah, he did warn me, but he did say he would do his very best. I had surgery. It took a lot longer than expected. He said when he went in there, it was a bit more of a mess than he'd anticipated and a little bit more complicated, so it took 4.5 hours. I had 2 plates and 10 screws, including a syndo screw that goes through the syndesmotic joint. Just holds that in place to allow your ligaments and stuff to heal, and obviously your bone. I will insert a picture of my metal work. I still have that all in my ankle now, and I will put a picture in so you can see that. First 2 weeks after surgery were in a back slab cast, so a cast that's open at the top with just a bandage over. It allows your leg to swell. Obviously, I couldn't do anything for those 2 weeks. I was on crutches. It was strict kind of couch rest, leg elevated, crutching just to go to the toilet and go up to bed or whatever. Boring couple of weeks. I went back to the fracture clinic after 2 weeks, and I then went into my proper cast, which was the normal fiberglass cast, for 4 weeks. So it was 6 weeks in a cast. Again, there's really not much you can do during that time. You're not allowed to put any weight, obviously, on the leg because it's healing, or through the cast because the cast isn't designed for that kind of weight. And it's the healing phase, so it was pretty boring. Kept it elevated. Rested as much as I was quite knackered. Rested as much as I could. Pain relief wise, I obviously can't take strong painkillers. I didn't find it painful at all. I had very brief pain when I first came round from the surgery, and it was because they'd put a tourniquet on my leg, obviously to stop the blood from getting in the way, basically, when they did the surgery. So when I first woke up in the recovery, I had this really awful, fiery pain in my leg. But it was simply because I'd had a tourniquet on, and when they straightened my leg and the blood went back, that pain went. And I can honestly say I didn't have any pain in my leg after that. I took paracetamol every 4 hours, and I think I took codeine, just like normal codeine, not like dihydrocodeine. So yes, I did take them. I don't really think I needed them really, but I thought, well, they've prescribed them and I'll take them. I was also on the Fragmin pain anti-blood clotting injections. Horrible, stingy little things. I was on them. But yes, so 6 weeks, boring as anything. Foot elevated as much as possible and just allowing the healing to take place. After 6 weeks, I went back to the fracture clinic. So it was around the 30th of December 2022, and this was the day that I had my cast off. I'd had the stitches out after surgery at the 2-week mark, so when I'd gone from my back slab to my proper cast, I'd had my stitches taken out, and there was quite a lot of them, and that was a little bit stingy when they took them out, but it wasn't too bad. So 30th of December, I went to the fracture clinic and I had my cast taken off and I was given my boot. And this is basically when I started my recovery. It was a boot that you've got like a material thing that you put on, and then you put your foot in like the cage thing in the boot, and then I had like a little air pump, and I had to pump the was it the boot I pumped up, or was it the material thing? I had to pump the material thing up, I think, and it just kind of like tightened then on your leg and gave it a bit of extra support. I'm self-employed. I'm a dog groomer, so my income basically went to zero when I broke my leg. I couldn't work. I didn't have any sick pay. I had to use savings to survive. And so in my head, I had decided that the second I got that boot, I needed to get back on my feet because I needed to be grooming again, because I needed an income. Bills to pay, horses to pay for, kind of thing. That possibly pushed me a little faster than maybe it would have done otherwise, but I think I'd actually already started to put dogs into the diary to do. So I think I'd given myself till week 9. So this was week 6, going into week 7 when I got the boot. And I think I would book dogs in from week 9. So I had given myself 2 weeks, basically, 2.5 weeks maybe, to be on my feet without crutches to groom dogs. Possibly a little bit ambitious, but I did it, and it worked. So yeah, basically got the boot, and their instructions at the hospital were to kind of be guided by me and the physio people. So they referred me to physio at Arrow Park, which is my local hospital. But it was basically start introducing some weight bearing, use your boot, 2 crutches, start weight bearing a little bit, and then eventually weight bearing a bit more, drop down to 1 crutch, weight bearing a bit more, and then eventually walking without the crutches. They didn't give me a proper plan. They didn't give me a sheet to say like, oh, by week 1 you need to be doing this, and week 2, it was pretty open to interpretation, and my interpretation was that I was going to be walking quickly. I was bored. I don't do very well hanging around the house. I needed to go back to work. I wanted to get back to the horses. I needed to get back into the saddle. All these things, I think, just kind of pushed me to get back to normal as quickly as possible. So I started off, from that moment I left the department with my crutches and my boot. Straight away I would put a little bit of weight through my foot if I was standing. In the house, I would crutch to the toilet with the boot, or I was starting to move around a little bit more, and I would, even from like day 1 and day 2, I was putting a little bit weight through it, testing a little bit out. I was walking a couple of steps, putting a little bit weight while walking, but with the 2 crutches. I basically just continued to do that. What I will suggest is go and buy yourself some chunky trainers, because the boot is quite high compared to the normal footwear, and I found it really difficult to be so different in height, and my hips and my back started to hurt because I was leaning over constantly. So I went and bought some Skechers. I don't really like Skechers, but I went and bought the chunkiest Skechers I could find, so that my good foot was almost the height of my boot, and it just made walking a little bit easier. You can buy, I can't remember the name of it, but you can buy a little attachment that you can put on your shoe of your normal foot to raise it up. But they're quite expensive, And I just thought, well, if I buy some trainers, I could just use those trainers afterwards, and I've got a pair of trainers, so I kind of, I didn't feel like it was wasted money. But I would definitely do that, because the last thing you want is to be causing your hips and back pain, because then you're dealing with getting back to normal with your leg and, dealing with all the pain. It's just not worth it. So as you will probably know, what sparked this video that I'm doing now is I put a video up at the beginning of 2023 of me walking, and it was 7.5 weeks after my surgery, so 1.5 weeks after getting my boot, and I am walking up and down my hallway out there without crutches. A few people didn't believe that that could possibly be 7.5 weeks from surgery. I can assure you it was 7.5 weeks from surgery. I did push myself pretty quickly, again, possibly because I needed to get back to work. But some of the key things that helped me was anytime I was going to be sat at home, either watching TV on the couch or up in bed, I would basically rub my foot, massage my foot, move my ankle round in circles. I would write the alphabet with my ankle, so like you do an A, then you do a B, you C, D, all the way up. I would write my name with my ankle. I would get a tennis ball and I would roll the tennis ball up and down the sole of my foot, up through my heel, anything to start to stretch the structures in my foot, because you will find when you start to weight bear, you will get really quite excruciating pain through your heel and under your foot. It's a bit like if anyone has had plantar fasciitis, it's that kind of pain. And I think that pain causes people to panic and back off. But I was quite curious about this and I researched into it, and it's simply because all your soft tissue, like your skin, your tendons, ligaments and all the soft tissue contracts because it's not been used. And so when you start walking, you're re-stretching all the structures. What helped for me was to think logically about where the pain was coming from and recognise that the pain was not coming from my break sites, basically. My break sites, they're strong, they've got metalwork, they weren't going anywhere. And I realised the pain was coming from other places, and part of me recognised that was normal, and to a certain extent, I was going to have to push through that pain, whether I did it now or whether I did it in 6 weeks' time. That little pain barrier needed to be pushed through. So don't be alarmed if you feel quite intense, tight pain when you start weight bearing. And it can be excruciating. I would probably say that was the most painful part of the whole process, from breaking all the way through, was that kind of tight foot and heel pain. So I did go to NHS physio. It wasn't particularly helpful. They had me doing the same things I was doing anyway. The dorsiflexion, so you're pointing your toes, you're lifting your toes back, rolling your ankle. They used to measure the angles. Pretty early on, my dorsiflexion, despite having a Sindo screw through the joint, it was nearly back to normal. And I think it was just because from the moment that boot cast came off and I went into the boot, I just spent hours every day moving my foot around and slowly kind of stretching it more and more. So I do think that really helped. And then just walking on it, I think, just kind of like pushing through, adding a little bit of weight. I went back to work at week 9 without crutches, so I was on a boot, standing on a boot. I should have probably done a bit less. I was possibly a bit over ambitious. I went back and did 3 dogs a day, so I would start at 10 and I would finish about 4, and I was on my feet. I have a stool so I could sit down every now and then, but I was carrying dogs from the bath to the table and I was grooming them, blow drying them, whatever. My ankle did used to swell quite badly at the end of those days, but you know, it was very early days. There was a ton of metal work in there. I think it was just my body's kind of response, but it wasn't painful. I would be physically tired because I wasn't used to doing that kind of work. And my ankle would be swollen, but my ankle wouldn't be sore. But I just used to elevate it and try and like rest it a little bit. I was also by week 9 back doing the horses, with a little bit of help from my dad when it came to things like tipping the wheelbarrows and that kind of thing. But yeah, I pretty much by week 9 was walking completely without crutches with the boot. And at home, I had already started to walk without the boot by week 9. Yeah, so walking without the boot, it started off as laziness, I'm going to be honest with you. It was things like going to the toilet in the middle of the night. I couldn't be bothered putting the boot on to get up to go for a wee. There was about 15 steps from my bedroom door to my toilet door. So I started off with the crutches, but I didn't have the boot on. And I would crutch to the bathroom. And then I would start to put a little bit of weight through it. And I would do the same in the evening when I had my shower. I would, couldn't be bothered putting the boot on and taking it off and putting it on, taking it off. So I would just crutch to the bathroom, but put weight on my leg, even without my boot on. And then that progressed to sheer laziness of not using the crutches. So I would get up and I wouldn't stride and walk normally. I would do like little shuffly steps. So I would do tiny little shuffly steps, not really flexing it much, just kind of keeping everything still and straight, but putting the weight on it. And I would potter to the bathroom and back. I would also do it down here. So if I was sat here, that door there is the downstairs toilet. I would just get up and I would just do my little potter to the toilet. I will then found that I gained a little bit more confidence. I would start pottering into the kitchen and, you know, putting the kettle on and pottering back. And then I found that I was doing less of my little potter and more of an actual walk. It was just something that sort of, as I got confident and as the structures in my leg started to hold up a bit better, it just was like a natural progression. I went to 3 NHS physio sessions. I think I was meant to go to 6 or 7 or 6 maybe. Yeah, gave up after 3. It was a waste of my time. It was a waste of their time. You know, somebody else could have used that slot. I was already much further ahead than they were going to have me anyway. So it was like it was taking me longer to walk from the, you know, car park to the place than I was actually there, and it was just an absolute waste of time. I could do it all at home. It might work for other people, and some people might choose to go to private physio, but it was just something that I didn't feel that was going to be beneficial to me. I also then started going out and about with the boot, but without crutches, from week 9. I was back walking the dogs at the sand dunes. I would go up and down the dunes. I found going down a bit more difficult because I still didn't have full dorsiflexion, and you kind of need that to help you when you're going down the hill. But yeah, I just pushed it a little bit. I trialed different terrains. You know, sometimes I would do something and then it would be a bit extra swollen, so I'd be a bit more careful the next day. Did I push it too far at times? Probably. Do I regret doing that? No. At the end of the day, I got back where I needed to be, when I needed to be. So, no, I don't regret it. I went to my appointment at the fracture clinic 6 weeks after having my boot on. I went in my boot, but obviously no crutches, just walked in with the boot. By that point, I'd been walking around the house without boot for 3 weeks. I walked loads of places with the boot. I was doing the horses, I was back working, had my x-rays. they were really pleased, and they basically said, you're good to go. Boot off, back to normal life as much, as much as you want, build it back up. They were very much just like, be guided by you. I asked when I could ride, and they said whenever you want. I took my boot off. I walked out the hospital without the boot on. I went home. Obviously, Mum had driven me there. I got in my car and I drove to the farm. I didn't ride that night, but I did ride the next day. Yeah, back on riding. I don't know if there's any riders who are watching this, but I actually found it hard to get on because I didn't really use my brain. I've been riding for over 35 years, but obviously when you get on a horse, you put your left foot in the stirrup. And so I was like, oh, it's all good. It's my right foot I've broken. And it wasn't until I was stood on my mounting block with my left foot in the stirrup and I suddenly realised that I have to stand on my bad foot and push off from it. So I think I probably clambered on a little bit the first couple of times. But yeah, back to normal riding. It was a bit stiff in the stirrup. And it would get a bit sore in that position. So I rode with my stirrups a hole longer for about 3 months. Within 2 weeks, I was walk trotting and doing a bit of canter. Yeah, back to normal. And yeah, that was it. I can honestly say, besides a little bit of stiffness occasionally in the morning, occasional pain if I clang my plate against, I've got a stool in the salon with metal on it, and occasionally I'll whack my leg against that and clang my plate, and that hurts. It's a little bit bigger than the other one. It probably always will be. All my hardware is still in. My Sindo screw, which is my screw that kept the joint together, I'm fairly sure snapped about 2 years ago. They did say it probably would, and that if it did, I might feel a pop and I might feel some pain, but that it should be fine. They just leave it in snapped. I remember hearing a pop. I didn't get any pain. My flexion is completely back to normal. I'm fairly sure it's gone. I'm quite interested to have an X-ray to find out, but don't need one. So there we are. So apologies, it was a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I didn't want to babble on and bore you senseless. But yeah, that was my recovery. So I did my injury on November the 9th, 2022. I was back on a horse, I think by February the 11th, 2023. I'd been back in work since the January, and yeah, I was back walking with the boot, cat, 7.5 weeks post-surgery, 1.5 weeks after getting the boot, I had ditched the crutches. As I say, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not saying this is the way you should do it. I'm sure there'll be doctors out there looking at me with raised eyebrow thinking, well, you were very lucky to get away with it, but it worked. And it was a pretty bad injury that I had. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the comment box or message me, and I will try and... Cat's trying to gag in here. And I will do my best to answer them. I will try and put some photos in of my hardware and what my injury looked like when it was, swollen and stuff. Unfortunately, I don't have any photos of the actual injury the day it happened. I really wish I'd asked the paramedics or my dad or someone to take the photos, because I know people are a bit squeamish about stuff like that, but I would love to have the pictures, because it was at a very funny angle. It was basically, my leg was straight and then my lower leg was off to the right. It was quite entertaining. But yeah, as I say, drop me a message. If there's any questions or anybody wants me to go into anything else about the accident or what happened, then I can always do another video. But I was just aware that I didn't want to bore everybody to death with me just babbling all about my injury. I hope some of that might have been of some use to you, and good luck with your recoveries.